His own family, the ones who were supposed to support him, turned their backs on him. They told him he would never amount to anything, that the dreams he had, those unconventional ambitions, were nothing more than a fool's errand. They kicked him out, disowned him because he refused to follow the family's business or a simple career like his older siblings, but chose to follow his own ambitions. And for years, he lived in the shadow of that rejection, forced to prove his worth to a world that didn't believe in him. 2 years later, he did something unbelievable that led them back to his doorstep begging for forgiveness. You will never imagine what he did. Michael Carter grew up in the kind of small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the road ahead seemed already mapped out for you from birth. At 22, he had lived his entire life within the tight-knit, unspoken rules of a working-class family. His parents, Sarah and James, were good people, hardworking, practical, and, like most folks in their circle, focused on getting through the day without much thought of tomorrow. Their world revolved around stability, and they believed that if you did your part, put in the time, you'd get by. Their mantra was simple: hard work pays off and you stick with what you know. In their eyes, anything else was a gamble, a waste of time. Michael wasn't their first child. He wasn't even their second. He was the youngest. His older siblings, Chris and Laura, had already carved their paths in the world. Chris had followed in their father's footsteps and became a factory worker, just like James. Laura, the oldest, had always been the more practical one. She was a nurse, and in the eyes of their parents, both had done well. Both had followed the blueprint. But Michael had other ideas. He had always been different. It wasn't that Michael didn't respect the hard work his parents put into building a life for their family. Far from it. He admired them deeply. They were the bedrock of his world, teaching him the value of resilience and responsibility. But early on, Michael felt the stirrings of something more, something beyond the life they had planned for him. Where his siblings saw security, Michael saw limits. Where they saw a steady job as the highest achievement, Michael saw it as a compromise. At school, Michael was a dreamer. He had a talent for art that no one in the family seemed to understand. While his classmates were making plans for careers in engineering or business, Michael found himself staring at the sky, sketching the world as he saw it. His notebooks weren't filled with notes on history or math problems. They were filled with half-finished drawings of cities, landscapes, and people. It wasn't that he wasn't interested in the subjects he was taught. He was a good student, after all, but he never felt connected to the rigid structures of the academic world. He knew his future didn't lie in the typical job his family expected him to take. The conflict began when Michael was in his final year of high school. It was time to start thinking about the future, and as he sat with his parents at the dinner table one evening, they asked him what he planned to do with his life. They expected him to follow the safe path, get a stable job, work hard, and eventually buy a house like everyone else. But Michael had been thinking long and hard about his future, and for him, the future wasn't in a factory or an office. He wanted to be a photographer, not just any photographer. He wanted to travel, to capture the stories of the world through his lens, to document the lives of people in places far beyond the small town they called home. It wasn't a career, it was a calling. When Michael first mentioned his dream to his father, the response was sharp, quick, and dismissive. "That's not a real job, Michael," James had said, his voice firm, as if the subject was closed. "People don't make a living chasing dreams. You're better off with something secure." Michael could feel the weight of his father's words, the finality in them. His father wasn't just rejecting his idea, he was rejecting Michael himself. "If you want to throw away everything we've worked for, then you're on your own." And with that, Michael felt the first painful rip in the fabric of their relationship. But it wasn't just his father. His mother, too, had a hard time understanding. She was more quiet about it, but her concern was written all over her face. "Are you sure about this, Michael?" she had asked, her voice trembling slightly. "This isn't the life we envisioned for you. We want you to be happy, but we also want you to be safe." It wasn't just concern, it was fear. Fear that Michael's dream would lead him into hardship, into a life of uncertainty. She couldn't see past the traditional idea of what success should look like, and it broke her heart to think of Michael choosing a path that might leave him struggling. The arguments at home became more frequent. Every conversation seemed to spiral into the same argument: Michael's desire for an unconventional future clashing with his family's expectations. His father would remind him of the bills, the mortgages, the sacrifices they had made to give him a good upbringing. "Do you think money grows on trees?" James would ask, his voice sharp with frustration. "You can't live on passion alone." His mother, torn between wanting to protect him and wanting to understand him, would quietly withdraw into herself. Michael could feel the walls closing in around him, the space between his dreams and his family's expectations growing wider and wider. And then it happened, the night that changed everything. Michael, at the end of his high school career, finally made his decision. He wasn't going to follow the path they wanted for him. He was going to move to the city to chase his dream of becoming a photographer. He'd save money, make connections, and prove that it was possible. And so, one night, in the middle of a quiet dinner, Michael told them that he was leaving. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. He said it firmly, almost as if he needed to convince himself that this was the right decision. The silence that followed was deafening. His mother didn't say a word. She simply stared at her plate, her hands frozen in midair. His father looked at him like he had just betrayed everything they had worked for. The anger in his father's eyes was something Michael had never seen before. James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back," he said, his voice low but filled with finality. "You're no son of mine." And in that moment, Michael realized that no matter how much he loved them, no matter how hard he had tried to make them understand, they would never see the world the way he did. Michael walked out that night, carrying only a suitcase and a heart full of dreams, leaving behind the family he had once thought would always be by his side. The door slammed behind him with a finality that echoed in his mind. And so began Michael's journey, not just to become a photographer, but to find a way back from the place where his family had left him, from the place where rejection became his fuel. He didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning. After Michael walked out that night, the world outside felt colder than he could have ever imagined. The city was a beast, large, unforgiving, and relentless. He had dreamed of making it here, but nothing could prepare him for how hard it would be. There were no warm welcomes, no open arms. Just an endless sea of strangers who didn't care about his dream, who saw only a young man with no connections, no experience, and no money. The first few weeks were the hardest. Michael slept on friends' couches, sometimes in abandoned buildings when he had nowhere else to go. The art world he had imagined, the glamour of capturing the world with his lens, seemed like an illusion. He had hoped for some kind of break, but instead, he found himself working odd jobs just to stay afloat. He was a dishwasher, a janitor, a delivery driver, all while trying to pursue his passion on the side. The bills piled up, the deadlines loomed, and the exhaustion began to eat away at his spirit. But even in those moments of exhaustion, Michael never stopped dreaming. Every day felt like a grind. Long hours, little sleep, and days filled with rejection. Yet, his passion for photography was the only thing that kept him moving forward. The first time he walked into a gallery with his portfolio under his arm, he was told, "We don't have room for new talent." 100 rejections later, Michael started to feel the weight of those words. "We don't have room for you." And the more he was told no, the harder it became to believe that maybe he was just chasing an impossible dream. There were nights when Michael would lie awake, staring at the ceiling of whatever apartment or couch he had found himself on. The city was alive with noise, but all he could hear was the question that kept him up at night. Had he made a mistake? Was it all worth it? Was he fooling himself? The doubt crept in like a shadow, and it was during those moments of silence that the weight of his family's rejection felt the heaviest. He had left everything, his home, his family, their love, only to feel alone in a world that wasn't interested in his dream. His phone had long been silent. His parents hadn't called. He hadn't heard from his siblings in months. And in those lonely moments, Michael wondered if they were right, if he was better off just being like everyone else. But Michael wasn't the type to give up. There was something deep inside him, an urge, a hunger, that refused to be extinguished. His hands were raw from handling the camera so much, and he had learned more about lighting, composition, and editing than he ever had in school. He poured every ounce of his energy into learning, into improving. The rejection letters piled up, but so did the photographs. He had nowhere else to turn but forward. Every failure, every closed door, became part of his journey, each one shaping him into the artist he was becoming. Months passed, then a year. Michael's breakthrough didn't come in the way he had hoped. There was no single moment that changed everything. It was a slow build. It started with a small exhibition at a local coffee shop, where a few of his pieces were hung up for people to see. Not many came, but it was a start. And from there, slowly, word of mouth spread. One person saw his work and shared it with a friend who happened to be an art director. Soon, Michael was doing freelance work, small gigs, but enough to keep him going. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. He was no longer just a dreamer. He was a photographer, struggling but real. Along the way, he found a few people who would help him. People who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. There was Sarah, a seasoned photographer who had made a name for herself in the industry. She took him under her wing, offered him advice, and taught him the ropes. "You can't get stuck in your head," Sarah would say. "The best thing you can do is keep shooting, keep creating, keep failing, because that's how you find your voice." Michael took that to heart. But it wasn't just Sarah who became his mentor. There was also Leo, a fellow artist who was struggling just like him. Leo would drop by Michael's small apartment late at night, bringing his own frustrations, his own doubts. Together, they'd sit, talking about the future and what it would take to get there. Leo would joke, "I don't know how we're gonna make it, but we're gonna make it." And Michael, despite the weight of everything on his shoulders, would laugh, nodding in agreement. Because even when everything seemed impossible, they both had something. Their dreams, their fire, and their refusal to give up. Sometimes that was enough. But still, loneliness was always there. For every small victory, there was a reminder of what he had left behind. Every time he saw a family together, every time he heard about his siblings' successes, it brought him back to the night he had left. "What if I'm wrong?" he would think. "What if I never get to go back? What if they never forgive me?" His mind often wandered back to his parents, the last words they had said to him ringing in his ears. "Don't bother coming back." And yet, even with all that doubt, even with all the uncertainty, he kept moving forward. There were moments when he almost picked up the phone to call them, to beg for forgiveness, to make amends. But then he would remember why he had left, why he had chosen this path in the first place. And so he stayed quiet. He kept pushing forward, even though every step felt like it was leading him farther away from home. He had no idea how long this would last or if he would ever find success, but he knew one thing for sure: he could never go back. Not without proving to himself that his choice had been the right one. Through every setback, every moment of self-doubt, Michael realized something important. Success wasn't just about making money or gaining recognition. It was about proving to himself that he could survive, that he could do something with his life that no one could take away. Every failure felt like another step closer to the breakthrough he knew was coming. The night Michael got the email, he had been working tirelessly for weeks. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just another day in the grind. He'd just finished editing a set of photos for a small business, the work he had taken on to pay the bills. His phone buzzed, interrupting his routine. At first, he didn't think much of it. But then, the name of the sender caught his eye. It was from a well-known photography agency, an agency he had dreamed of working with since the very beginning. Michael opened the email, half expecting it to be another rejection. Another thank you, but no thank you. But this time, the words were different. "We've seen your portfolio. We'd like to offer you a contract to work with us on a major project. Your work has caught the attention of our clients. and we believe you have a unique vision that could make waves in the industry." The email was a ticket, his breakthrough, the moment he had been working for, the moment that had once seemed like a far-off dream. The email wasn't just a contract. It was the validation he had fought for, the proof that his sacrifice, his struggle, his doubt, all of it had led to this. Michael stared at the screen, his hand trembling slightly. A surge of emotions washed over him. Pride, excitement, but also fear. His mind raced with questions. What now? What does this mean? For so long, he had been on his own, chasing this dream without any expectation of help or recognition from his family. He had made it without them. And yet, as he sat there, staring at the email, something gnawed at him. A cold, uncomfortable feeling that made his chest tighten. Just hours after that email, Michael got another call. This one was different. It wasn't about work. It was from his sister, Laura. She had been the closest to him growing up, the one person who understood his desire to break free, the one person who had supported him through thick and thin, until that fateful night. Now, her voice was strained, distant. "Michael, it's Mom. She's in the hospital. It's bad." The words hit Michael like a punch in the gut. For a moment, the room seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing in as if the air had been sucked out. "Mom's in the hospital? What do you mean? What happened?" Laura's voice cracked. She wasn't crying, but Michael could hear the weight of worry in her tone, something that made his heart ache. "It's her heart," she explained. "She's been sick for a while, but she didn't want anyone to know." Michael felt a lump form in his throat. The memory of his mother, the woman who had once been the center of his world, flooded his mind. The late nights when she would sit with him, listening to his dreams, telling him he could be anything, that he didn't have to follow the same path as everyone else. But now, that same woman, the one who had rejected him for his choices, was lying in a hospital bed. The very family who had cast him aside now needed him. And Michael was faced with a decision that tore at his soul. In that moment, he didn't know whether to feel anger, pity, or something else altogether. All the memories of the hurtful words they had thrown at him came rushing back. The night they disowned him still felt fresh. The sting of their rejection still burned in his chest. "You're wasting your life," they had said. "You'll never make it, and if you fail, don't come crawling back to us." Now, as he stood on the edge of this newfound success, Michael had to ask himself the hardest question he had ever faced. Could he forgive them? Could he help them after everything that had happened? He had spent so long proving himself to the world, carving out his own path, that the idea of turning back felt like a betrayal of his own journey. But then he thought of Laura, his sister, who had been the one constant in his life. He thought of how she had tried to be there for him, even when the rest of the family turned their backs. She was the one who still called him, still checked in, still believed in him. Could he turn his back on her? Too, could he stand by while his mother, the woman who had once believed in him, was lying in a hospital bed? Alone? His heart was torn in two. Michael walked to the window, staring out at the city below. It was quiet now, the usual hustle and bustle of the streets muffled by the weight of his decision. His phone rang again. This time it was from the agency confirming the contract. They were ready to move forward. His dreams, his future were just a signature away. He had worked so hard, and now it was all coming to fruition. But his family, the same family that had rejected him, was now asking for help. He thought about everything he had sacrificed. His home, his family, the comfort of living a life that was easy and safe. He had chosen this path knowing it would be hard. But now, at this critical moment, he realized that the price of success wasn't just the sacrifices he had made along the way. The price was the pain of choosing between vengeance and forgiveness, between keeping the past locked away or offering the very people who had rejected him a chance at redemption. Michael stood at a crossroads, his heart heavy with the weight of this decision. He had finally made it, had finally achieved everything he once dreamed of. But now, with his family in crisis, he was faced with a choice that would define the rest of his life. Was this success worth more than his family? Could he let go of the anger, the resentment, the years of hurt? Or would he walk away, just like they had once walked away from him? The answer, Michael realized, wasn't simple. But sometimes the hardest choices come with the highest stakes. It had been days since Michael got the call from his sister, Laura. The weight of the decision gnawed at him, eating away at his focus. The email confirming his contract had been signed. The dream he'd worked for all these years. But the urgency of his mother's condition lingered in his mind like a shadow. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't go back to his old life, but could he walk away from the people who had raised him? The very people who had made him the man he was. What do you think Michael should have done in this situation? Or what would you have done if you found yourself in his position? Would you have forgiven them? Or would you leave them behind to suffer the consequences of sending you away? Finally, after days of wrestling with his own emotions, Michael decided. The bitterness, the resentment, all of it. It had to be let go. He wasn't going to turn his back on his family. Not this time. He had built a life of his own, had fought for every step forward. Now, as the success he dreamed of was just within his grasp, he would make a choice to show them something they never expected: forgiveness. Michael's heart raced as he stood outside the hospital room, his hand resting on the cold metal door handle. He had been here countless times before, but this moment felt different. This wasn't a visit to a parent he still had a relationship with. This wasn't a visit to someone who loved him unconditionally. No, this time it was to the woman who had once turned her back on him, his mother, and the family that had rejected him when he needed them the most. He had spent so many years proving them wrong, trying to show them that his path wasn't a mistake, that he could succeed on his own. But now, none of that mattered. When he finally stepped into the room, everything seemed to fall away. The sterile smell of the hospital, the beeping of the monitors, the low murmur of nurses in the hallway, all of it faded into the background. What remained in that moment was his mother lying in that bed, frail and pale, looking so small. She was nothing like the woman who had once held him close and whispered dreams into his ear. The years of separation and silence hung between them like a heavy fog. But it wasn't just his mother who lay there. His entire family was there. His father, his sister Laura, his aunt. And all of them looked up with wide eyes as Michael entered. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the machines. And then, all at once, the tension that had built up over the years came crashing down. Michael's gaze locked with his mother's. She looked at him with a mix of surprise, guilt, and was that regret? Her lips trembled, but no words came out. His father, who had always been the stronger of the two, looked away, unable to meet his son's eyes. The sting of rejection was still fresh, but Michael had come too far to let it stop him now. He wasn't there to rehash the past. He wasn't there to dwell on the hurtful things they had said when they kicked him out. He was there for one thing only, to show them that despite everything, he could forgive them. That, even after all this time, he could still be the son they once loved. The room was heavy with unspoken words. Michael took a deep breath before speaking, his voice steady but filled with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "I'm here because I'm not going to leave things like this." His voice cracked just slightly, but he fought to keep it composed. "I know it's been a long time. I know there's been a lot of pain, a lot of things that should have been said, and things that shouldn't have been, but I want you to know that I've made it." He paused, eyes scanning the faces of his family. "I've made it without you, and I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to forget what happened, but I am asking for you to be a part of my life again." For a long moment, no one spoke. His mother's eyes filled with tears, and she let out a quiet sob. His father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unable to bear the weight of the moment. It was Laura, his sister, who broke the silence. She stood up slowly, her eyes glistening as she crossed the room to embrace Michael. The two of them stood there, holding each other tightly, as if they could erase all the years of hurt in that one moment. But it wasn't that simple. Not everything could be fixed with a hug. His mother, still frail, reached out with trembling hands, and for a moment, Michael thought she might speak. But instead, she simply whispered his name, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry." Her words were barely a breath, but to Michael, they carried the weight of years. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't about proving himself anymore. This wasn't about showing them that he had made the right choice. It was about healing. And as painful as it was, healing meant opening himself up to the possibility of their acceptance or their rejection. He could feel the rawness of the moment, the rawness of the family that had turned its back on him, now broken and fragile, just like him. They had made mistakes just as he had. But in the end, Michael knew that it wasn't just about the past. It was about the present. About making the choice to move forward, to break the cycle of rejection and bitterness that had defined their relationship for so long. He had already proven his worth to the world, but now, in front of the very people who had once rejected him, he had to prove something different. That he could forgive. That he could choose love over anger. That he could make a decision that didn't destroy everything he had worked for. As he looked around the room at his family, he saw something he hadn't noticed before. The regret in their eyes. The longing to be a family again. His mother's hand, still trembling, reached for his, and in that moment, Michael knew. This was the beginning of something new. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But it was real. The journey to this moment had been long and painful, but Michael had finally arrived at the most important conclusion of all. Family was messy, imperfect, and sometimes cruel, but it was also the place where healing began. The choice was his now, to move forward, to rebuild, and to start anew. Whatever happened next, Michael knew that in this room, something had changed. The days following that emotional confrontation passed slowly, but with a sense of peace settling over Michael's life, despite the complexity of what had happened. He had always known that success didn't fix everything, but now, standing in the midst of this complicated family reunion, he could see that what he had thought was just a personal achievement, his rise from nothing, had become something greater. It had become a bridge, not just for him, but for the people who had once turned their backs on him. And somehow, as time passed, Michael knew that his greatest challenge wasn't making money. It was learning to open himself to others again, to trust again. Over the next few weeks, Michael didn't just watch as his family tried to pick up the pieces. He became part of the process, making calls, offering his support in the way only he could. His financial success had allowed him to make a tangible difference. He paid off debts that had hung over his family for years, and even covered all the medical bills for his mother. Yet, as generous as the offers were, they came with no strings attached. He had learned that there was something more important than money. There was healing. There was a place for his family to start fresh. And though Michael's actions spoke volumes, the emotions were far from simple. His mother, still recovering, had become a quiet presence in his life. She showed gratitude, yes, but it was mixed with the years of hurt and regret that still lingered between them. The awkwardness in their conversations was palpable, and Michael often caught himself searching for the right words, for the right way to bridge the silence between them. But no words could undo the past, no matter how hard he tried to fix things. It was his father, however, who had the hardest time adjusting to the new dynamic. He had always been the pillar of the family, the one who stood strong in the face of hardship. But with all his strength, he had never known how to show vulnerability, how to apologize for his own role in pushing Michael away. When Michael offered to pay off the mortgage on their house, his father had refused at first. The pride that had kept him from reaching out to Michael for so long flared again. It wasn't the money he refused. It was the admission that he, too, had failed his son. The emotional weight of that realization was too much, and for days Michael waited, unsure of what the next step would be. Then, one evening, when the sky had darkened and the house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock, Michael received a call. His father's voice, deep and steady but filled with an emotion Michael had never heard before, broke through the silence. "I'm sorry, son. I should have been there for you. I'm sorry for the way we treated you." It was simple, yet it carried the weight of years of distance. And in that moment, Michael realized that healing wasn't about having the perfect answer. It was about giving room for the raw truth to be spoken. even if it wasn't easy. His father wasn't perfect, no one was, but he had taken the first step towards healing. But not all wounds healed that quickly. His sister, Laura, still struggled with feelings of inadequacy. Despite everything Michael had done for the family, there was still a part of her that couldn't quite forgive herself for how she had treated him in the past. She avoided looking him in the eyes at family gatherings, as if afraid to face the truth that she had been part of the team that had cast him aside. Yet Michael understood. He had felt that same shame and guilt when he first walked back into their lives. But through time, he would see that just as he needed to heal, so did they. And sometimes, that healing came not through words but through actions. The family didn't become perfect overnight. There were moments of awkwardness, stilted conversations, unfinished apologies, things left unsaid. But there were also moments of warmth, of connection, that spoke louder than any words. Michael knew that this wasn't about erasing the past. It was about acknowledging it, accepting that they had all been hurt and slowly learning to rebuild. Together, not as the family they had once been, but as something new. A family that had learned the hard way that love wasn't just about sharing the good times. It was about supporting each other through the hardest moments, even when you didn't always understand each other. As the months passed, Michael's success continued to grow. His business flourished, and he became a symbol of resilience to those who had once doubted him. But as much as his material success had brought him peace, it was the acceptance of his family that finally completed him. There was still a part of him that longed for the unconditional love and understanding that he had once known as a child. But he had come to realize that healing didn't mean forgetting, and forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about moving forward, together, despite everything that had happened. Michael had come a long way from that young man who was once rejected by his family for his choices. He had turned pain into purpose, betrayal into strength. But he also knew that the journey wasn't over. There would always be more to learn, more to forgive, and more to heal. Yet, in this quiet moment, as he sat in the room with his family, watching them come together piece by piece, he knew that he had made the right choice. Not just for himself, but for all of them. His success had never been just about money. It had been about proving that even after everything, love could still heal. And as the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, Michael knew that no matter what came next, he had found something even more important than success: peace. As we near the end of Michael's journey, we're reminded that redemption doesn't always look like what we expect. It doesn't always come wrapped in neat packages or perfect moments. It doesn't even come with the promise of a clean slate or easy forgiveness. Instead, redemption is often found in the most unlikely of places, deep within ourselves, in the hardest choices, and in the relationships we choose to rebuild despite everything that's happened. Michael's story, like so many of ours, is one of contrasts. The pain of being rejected by those closest to him, the harsh sting of betrayal, followed by the slow, sometimes painful path to success. It's a story about what happens when you follow your own dreams, against all odds, and how the choices we make shape not just our future, but the people who are part of that journey. And sometimes the hardest choices lead us back to the very people who once rejected us. The ones who doubted us, who looked away when we needed them most. In a world that often teaches us to hold onto our grudges, to strike back at those who hurt us, Michael's choice to forgive is nothing short of powerful. He could have chosen to turn his back on them. He could have easily walked away, leaving them to struggle on their own. After all, they had done the same to him. But what does it mean to truly succeed? To truly rise above the pain and the rejection? Is it about the wealth we accumulate, the accolades we receive, or is it about something deeper, something that can't be measured by the material things we've acquired? In the end, Michael's story shows us that success isn't just about money. It's about the relationships we rebuild, the forgiveness we offer, and the lessons we learn along the way. Because no matter how far we rise, no matter how much we accomplish, there's always something more that matters, something that can't be bought or sold. Peace, connection, and the ability to forgive. Those are the true rewards of life. And sometimes, they come at a greater cost than we ever anticipated. Michael's journey wasn't easy, but it was his. And in the end, the choices he made, the risks he took, and the forgiveness he gave shaped a future far beyond what he could have ever imagined. The family he once thought lost to him forever became the very foundation of his success. And though it wasn't a perfect reconciliation, it was a start. It was the beginning of something new, something built not just on money, but on healing. And perhaps that's what we all need to remember. Sometimes the hardest journeys lead us to the places we were meant to be. We face obstacles, rejection, and pain, but through it all we find strength we never knew we had. And at the end of it, we come to realize that it's not the destination that matters most. It's the people we meet along the way, the choices we make, and the ways we heal the broken parts of ourselves and others. So ask yourself, what would you do if you were in his position? Could you offer forgiveness to those who once rejected you? Or would you walk away, choosing to leave the past behind? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, your experiences, your reflections. How do you think you'd handle such a crossroads? Every one of us has a story, a choice we've made or might make, that changes everything. And we want to continue sharing those stories with you. If you found Michael's journey as emotional and impactful as we have, make sure to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to hit that bell to stay updated, because we've got more powerful stories, twists, and life-changing moments coming your way. Thank you so much for watching Soulful Twists. It's been an honor to take this journey with you. Until next time, remember, sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most powerful changes. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.